Welcome to our Tropilunch. Today we're having Dr. Matt Hallett. Dr. Hallett is an assistant research professor with the Wildlife Ecology and Conservation Department at UF, position which is supported through a partnership with the Jacksonville Zoo and Botanical Gardens, and is a core faculty member in the Tropical Conservation and Development Program. He joined UF after completing his PhD in interdisciplinary ecology in the School of Natural Resources and Environment and received the TCD certificate at UF in 2017. Dr. Hallett's research focuses on the effects of habitat, hunting, logging, and livestock on the abundance and distribution of medium and large-bodied neotropical mammals, as well as the efficacy of approaches that integrate community participation into research, conservation, and management. Much of this work has been conducted in the Rupununi region of Guyana, where Dr. Hallett joined a group of highly trained local scientists in co-founding the Rupununi Wildlife Research Units. The unit collaborates with indigenous communities, private landowners, government agencies, and NGOs on wildlife monitoring activities across Guyana's interior. So thanks, Dr. Hallett, for coming, and the floor is yours.
Sure, thank you. Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks for having me. It's good to be back in Grinter Hall. Been a few months. So I am, instead of digging into one particular or very specific project or method today, I wanted to sort of share some experiences and encompass the last 15 years of my life in a short, tight 40-minute talk, because I think that what can be useful, especially for graduate students in TCD, is to get some practical experiences from people, some do's and don'ts. I have plenty of don'ts and a few do's to share over the last 15 years working in Guyana, and in particular in the TCD program, with the emphasis on the types of skills that we build and the types of conservation outcomes that we're after, thinking about how to marry these sort of research and conservation in having your research head in a direction that makes the impact that you want to. So certainly we haven't achieved it all, haven't been perfect, but here's what we've done so far. So first things to know about me is that I'm not from the rainforests of South America. I'm from Chicago, different type of jungle, and had most of my formative experiences in the zoo and aquarium and museum departments with a little bit of urban park. All of my first jobs early in my career were in zoos and aquariums because that was the scope of wildlife biology career that I was aware of growing up. Right, so being somebody who worked at the zoo or the aquarium seemed like the pinnacle when you go there on a field trip when you're 5 years old, and they are amazing jobs. And so that's right where I went out of undergrad and had some fantastic experiences, and built some really useful skills that I still use today, but ended up wanting to get out in the field and make a different type of impact. And so my position here at UF is shared with the Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens. So that's why I said it's like coming back home, because all of my sort of formative professional experiences were in zoos. And now I work for a zoo at least part of the year through a fairly complicated agreement with UF. But I don't actually do anything physically at the zoo. They pay me for conservation work, specifically in Guyana. And so we're also sort of bringing together academia, zoo, and conservation, and lots of things coming together. So today I'm going to talk to you about my experiences in Guyana, just so that nobody is feeling left out of where I'm talking about, one of these 3 small countries in the northern part of South America that many North Americans would sort of group together as maybe one country, and I learned many Latin Americans also looked at as those English-speaking ones that I might not learn all the names of, English or Dutch or French, right, speaking ones. But we're talking about the former British Guiana for the last 60 years or so, Guyana. And I've been working there for the last almost just going on 15 years. First as a volunteer. I left my job at my paying full-time job with benefits in Shedd Aquarium in Chicago, much to my parents' chagrin, to take a sort of volunteer position where they kept me alive and kept me housed at a indigenous community-run research station called Kaiman House in Guyana. And I knew almost nothing about Guyana when I went there. Just sort of took a chance and fell in love with the place and made some of the best friends that I have to this day. And then went back to do a master's, which focused in Guyana, PhD, which focused in Guyana, and then a job, which continues to focus in Guyana. So you can see that it's a place that I like to be. And it's for a number of reasons. One is this, right? Guyana is right here, smack in the middle of the Guyana Shield, which is one of the world's last frontier forests, meaning that all of this green is forest, all of this white is natural neotropical savanna, and only those little specks of red are deforestation related, mostly related to small scale gold mining. Guyana has a very low mean deforestation rate and is one of the top 3 countries in the world for percent forest covered by area, right? And the other 2 are right here, Suriname and French Guiana, right? So this is if you're a nature wildlife person, right, this is a place that you want to be. I work primarily in the Rupununi region of Guyana, of southwestern Guyana, near the border with Brazil. And this is what it looks like on the ground, right? So primarily indigenous Mukushi and Wapishan communities that still live lifestyles that are very much tied to the land. And most of the communities themselves are situated within the savanna in close proximity to forests so that you can access farming grounds, fishing, hunting, medicine, forest resources, and so on. And this part of the world has a very low human population density. As I said, people mostly live subsistence lifestyles, and something that took me a little while to learn was that it's not that there aren't a lot of people in this place, and that's, you should draw a direct line with not a lot of people, and that's why you have a lot of forest and intact savanna. There are plenty of people to have degraded this landscape over time. And so it's really the traditional management systems of Mukushi and Wapishan people that have resulted in large tracts of intact forests and undeveloped or not degraded savanna ecosystems like you see elsewhere across the continent. So this whole journey really started during my PhD dissertation here at UF in SNRE. And I had a very supportive supervisor, like, and he supported a very large and out-of-the-box PhD dissertation idea, which was a regional scale assessment of how jaguars are using the landscape. And so it's in the carrying out, once John said, okay, I'll go along with your crazy idea. It was figuring out how to carry out this project, in which sort of a lot of what I want to talk about today started. Because to carry out a large scale project, you need a lot of people, right? When I did my master's thesis in Guyana, we had 27 cameras that I was barely able to scrape together through a little bit of money. And then I was there for every single one, setting and checking and moving with a team of folks. But thinking about operating at a larger scale, right? Just from a logistical standpoint, you no longer can control all of the work yourself, which I feel I remember as a PhD student, there's a pressure that you have to do every stitch of every single thing alone yourself, because your name is going to be the one on the dissertation that goes on the UF archives. But right, in reality, we all have lots and lots of people that support these projects and help to make them a success. The potentially unique part of my story is that I was working in a place that I had already spent a year and already had a lot of close friends who I was invested in their seeing their quality of life, right, their capacity, and everything else improve with the opportunity of a large PhD project, right? So it wasn't just I was hiring techs, right, through a job posting, and I didn't know the people, and they just came and did a job and went home, and then I went and did a job and went home. These are my friends, right? So it makes it harder to treat them as employees sometimes. But it also means that I'm invested in seeing them have a better life as a result of the work that you're doing. And those things made me think a lot about not just the project that we were doing, but how we were working with people. And a friend of mine named Fernando, who's worked on every project that I've worked on over the last 15 years. He was in that picture with the big kind of much thinner and more fit and younger looking me a few slides ago. He sat down as we were starting this project and said, yeah, okay, you want to do this really big project and you need lots of people to help you with the work. Fine, I'm sure you can find people. But what do we get, right? You're getting a PhD and you're going to go away and be rich and famous. That was a perception. It's not true. Sorry, you haven't realized that you're doing a PhD right now. What do we get out of the deal? So Fernando and I and a group of friends sat down with a cooler of beer and had a very long conversation about, right, the equitable benefits of academic projects in the developing world. It wasn't worded like that, right? It was a very sort of straightforward conversation. And at the end, we came to an agreement, right? Number one, the most important thing was as I go, we go, right? So the focus was we're all friends, and whatever benefits this PhD sort of gives me in my career, those things should be shared out, right? The sort of like rising water should lift all boats kind of situation. It was very important that people understood that we're researching wildlife, and wildlife are food in this part of the world. And where that wasn't the case where I grew up, right? I mean, animals are food, but you buy them from the grocery store, you never really see the animal, right? So the acknowledgement that people are engaging in this project because they're interested in how food sources are going to be sustained over time was critical. It was important to us that people be informed with what we're doing and why, right? Camera traps were the main tool that we were using to study people, which means that you're putting cameras out in people's personal spaces where they're going to collect food and bathe and go to farm and go hunting, right? Nobody wants somebody to come set cameras in their personal home or their backyard. And so it was important for people to know where cameras are, why they were there, what information we were interested in, what information we were not interested in, namely like what people are doing, where they're going, and who's there. And so we did this by using, how to get rid of this thing. Anyways, we did this by using the communication structures that are already in place in this region, which are monthly open village meetings, right? So either myself or members of our team would present information at village meetings and keep people apprised of what we're doing and why and what we're finding. Another thing that we discussed was that we're a group, we're a team, and we're not a single hero, especially the one of us that's not from the place that we were working. And then with a bunch of other people working together, right? So this goes along with sort of sharing the benefits of this work, but trying to avoid, right, talking about what we're doing as a group, as a collaboration, and not with focus on any one person. And then the last is that we operate on Guyana time. This is a challenge when you're doing a PhD project, right? You have a supervisor, deadlines, you have classes, and you only have certain budgets and restrictions. And Guyana time, even though it's on the South American continent, it's a Caribbean culture, right? And so work goes like a palm tree blowing in the breeze on the beach sometimes. But I had to learn that eventually, somehow, even against all odds, things have a way of getting done, and taking a deep breath and letting things play out, right, very often leads to better outcomes than being a pusher all the time, right? And so people that respond to that type of motivation of like constantly hounding them or asking or being behind them, right, is more about giving people freedom and allowing them to operate with a little bit more autonomy. All right, so we had that settled. Good. We set all the cameras out. We got lots of very cool camera trap images, right? Can't do a presentation without having gratuitous jaguar photos. We found out that they were using every stitch of this landscape, from the savannas to the palm gallery forest to natural bush islands that form on hilltops, seasonally flooded forests, course, the king of the jungle in the lowland forest, and up on the tops of all the highest mountains, which in this part of Guyana, we're talking about 3,000 feet-ish at the very highest. So not super high mountains like you find in the Andes. And we came up with population estimates that were associated with habitat types and also with ownership regimes. So we had sites that were in protected areas, sites that were on indigenous lands. We found that there were lots of jaguars, and they didn't seem to mind. They didn't seem to care whether they were in a protected area or an indigenous title land or state land or anywhere else. And so, great. We got to do the thing. We got some numbers. People carried out the work. That was good. But we were left with the question of that was meant to only be the first part, and the conservation part that's attached to this jaguar thing is related to conflict. So this savanna area has hosted large populations of cattle for 300 plus years as part of the colonial operation in formerly British Guyana. And for as long as there have been cattle roaming around the landscape, there have been jaguars that are happy to consume a naive and large and slow and sort of dim-witted herbivore on the landscape, right? And so we were left with this question of how do we get to, all right, so we got some information, we got a lot of cool camera track photos, that's fine. We answered a question, how do we start moving from data to conservation action? And I'm actually gonna come back to this because it's taken us a number of years to get back there. And our approach has been and continues to be to, instead of focusing on outcomes and products and questions, is to focus on people. Make a heavy investment in capacity building and training and opening up the research projects to the people that are working with us. And so our very rough way that we approach this is that as we increase participation in our research by the folks that are from this region, we also build their capacity. And as you increase participation and capacity, you increase the complexity of the questions that you're asking, right? And this was part of my dissertation, that sort of theoretical model part that most everybody's dissertation has, and it got much more complex. That when I showed this to the folks that I work with in the Rupununi region of Guyana, they laughed at because they thought it was a ridiculous intellectual exercise. But they like this part, the simplified thing. So it's broken down into lots of different steps, which I'll revisit for each of those, right? But the main thing is that we're opening up the research project, the process, through participation, and that includes the creation of research questions, right? I think one of the things that I saw, particularly here at UF, was that people would go to great lengths and submit themselves to poverty and rough field conditions and every other thing that a grad student goes to just to answer a question that's interesting to them, right? And so I realized that that trait is not limited to only graduate students in sciences, right? Lots of people love to have somebody say, that is an awesome question. How do I help you answer it? And be the person who supports them going through it. And so we've used that sort of motivation to come up with and answer questions as the driving force behind a lot of the work that we do. To answer, some questions are more complicated than others, so you need to build certain capacity. We start with fair compensation for everybody as the very base, and then work our way up, thinking about what are the skills that are necessary to answer more complex questions as we work our way up this side of the ladder. So here's some of the examples. A few examples of projects that we worked on. So in my master's thesis, we got these couple of photographs of bush dogs, which are a very unusual wild canid that lives in the Amazon basin. And these were actually the first camera trap photos of bush dogs in Guyana. So they're so rare that by itself warrants a paper. I actually had to go back. Did my master's at Miami of Ohio, and I had to go back for the start of the fall semester before we could pick up the last set of our cameras. And same Fernando went and picked up the set that actually had this picture on it. And I sent him a message on Facebook Messenger at that point. That's how long ago this was. And he messaged me back. I said, anything cool on the cameras? And he said, you got something on here that's rarer than rocking horse shit. But he didn't tell me what it was. And then it was weeks before I could actually get the pictures and see that he was talking about bush dogs. So that was interesting by itself. But what was particularly interesting was by sharing information, sharing these photos at village meetings, telling people about what we were finding, we found that people were very interested in this species, that there was a lot of cultural beliefs and respect around bush dogs. It has a name in Makushi called ai, which is mimics their high-pitched bark. And people really revere this species for being a very, very effective hunter. Lots of people would love to have a bush dog as their hunting dog because they never miss when they start hunting. And so this was sort of the first opportunity to start to think about, okay, there's some interest here, right? How can we work together to design and implement research?
Iothos veneticus. And this.
Okay. How could we work together to design a research question to understand more about the distribution of this species? And so I worked together with a friend, Samantha, and we accumulated a whole bunch, over 100. So we started out with 2 camera trap records. We accumulated a whole bunch more of anecdotal records from hunters, people going to farm, people going fishing. We asked them what they saw, where, when, what they were doing. We corroborated all that information with what we know about bush dogs from the literature, and vetted all that stuff. We actually, a bunch of people had pictures of their own. So this was a picture that somebody had on their phone that we were interviewing. This was a picture of somebody that found some bush dog pups in a hollow log and brought them home and tried to keep them. This was a picture of somebody who was actually at an international wildlife traders facility that had some bush dogs. So we learned about some not so excellent bush dog activity. Somebody had a picture of one that was a roadkill on the road. So we learned a lot from this rich local knowledge about a species that is not well known, that far surpassed whatever we could have tried to figure out from just 2 camera trap photos. And this was our first attempt at really sort of having somebody who was collecting these stories, that was really, really interested in seeing the outcome of this project, and was sort of a springboard to a whole bunch of other things. So one of the other ways that we've seen success was by supporting partner organizations. And I bring this up because today we're working with a local NGO on a bush dog project that runs alongside their giant armadillo project, because it turns out that putting camera traps at giant armadillo dens is a lot more effective way to get information about bush dogs than just setting them out as you would for a normal camera trap survey. We've been getting a ton of data on bush dogs coming in and out of giant armadillo dens, much more than we would have gotten otherwise. And I have a master's student at the University of Guyana. She's just starting her master's. She's also working on bush dogs in working landscapes, so logging and mining areas. So this bush dog thing got a little bit of life from the interest around the sort of biological aspects of the species, and continues to spin off new projects today. Part of being sort of supporting partner organizations for us has been fruitful when it comes especially to government organizations. So from that same data that we collected from my PhD dissertation, we worked together with the Protected Areas Commission within a new protected area at that time in Guyana, the Conacook Mountains protected area. They were doing some livelihood studies and hunting studies around the region. We were able to put the camera trap data and the hunting data together, right, to understand what's the current impact of subsistence hunting in and around this protected area. The nice news was that we found out that it was relatively sustainable, right? In this area, you had less than 1 person per square kilometer that was actively hunting. And the only species that we saw any negative relationship between, even the highest levels of intensity of hunting in this area, were the 2 slowest reproducing species, right? Tapir and giant armadillo. And then everybody's favorite food in the region, which is the paca, lowland paca, right? And so even that was sort of just lightly negative, and provided some really useful information locally, because one of the questions that a lot of people were asking is, everybody's hunting to some degree. What is the impact, right? Do we need to do it less? Do we need to spread it out? Do we need to go to other areas? And what we were seeing is that the way that people are hunting here, mostly on foot, very often with bow and arrow and dogs, right? So real sort of traditional subsistence level of hunting with some light commercial hunting and some use of firearms remained relatively sustainable. And then for the sort of broader Amazon, where these, the impact of hunting in different harvest regimes on these species isn't well known, provided sort of a rare bookmark for this might be a sustainable level of harvest, because most neotropical hunting studies are in a place where hunting is way out of control or it's already sort of unsustainable. And so on a broader scale, we felt that this study was useful in that it provided an example of where harvesting some of these species could be done relatively sustainably. And allowed us to continue to build these skills, right? We worked together to identify the research question. How do we bring this social data and this quantitative camera trap data together to measure the impact of human activity, continuing to build capacity within our team. Over the last 10 years in particular, we've also branched out on taxa. I started studying jaguars and large mammals, mostly because the interest was there, and I found the questions about human and jaguar interactions to be interesting. But since then, we've spun off a whole bunch of other projects to support partners and to capitalize on opportunities for our team to continue to build capacity, right? If we only just kept setting camera traps forever, only I am interested in that because I love setting camera traps more than anything else in the world, but I am a rare weirdo when it comes to that. So by branching out into other taxa, it continues to bring in other people to our team that might not be interested in mammals and camera traps or interested in other things. And for current members of our team, they can build new types of skills with different research techniques, different types of research questions. And so we continue to work on bush dogs as we accumulate more camera trap photos, caiman projects, tortoise projects. Elian's here, he's a graduate student in my lab. They're working on shorebird projects on the coast. We had a rabbit project. This was a new species to Guyana, not new species to science, but unusual species, tapirs. We're tracking river turtles. We've got all kinds of stuff going to keep people busy and to answer questions that are of interest to management. Here was one such example that we had to sort of branch out. So, and also to create a partnership between our teams in Guyana's interior and graduate students at the University of Guyana, of which two of them worked with our local teams on a human caiman conflict project, resulted in some super interesting papers, and started to create all sorts of new opportunities. This was a largely social project, so branching out into a whole different type of research, bringing in other partners and other levels of expertise to, this is Howard Barnabas, one of the best field guides that you will ever find. He's amazing at setting camera traps, catching turtles, right? Figuring out how to catch and survey and sample any kind of animal. He is very much outside of his comfort zone right here, sitting here and conducting an interview with somebody, but he pushed himself and became a better researcher because of it. And so those types of opportunities, I feel over time, is what has kept people coming back and keeping them engaged with the work that we do, right? So again, sort of thinking about where do we fall in this theoretical model and how do we continue to build skills. One of the other things that I think has been an important aspect over time has been sharing data with partners freely. I sit on a mountain of camera trap data that I could never, probably, even if I only did that, never process truly all of it for the whole rest of my life. So sharing it makes sense from a logistical standpoint. But for me, it also gives data a new life, right? An opportunity to make an impact by sharing it with others and then staying involved on the ground. So we've shared our camera trap data from my dissertation with Iwokrama, which is a conservation NGO in Guyana, but also maintains a 1 million hectare protected area, which is a large scale experiment in low impact, reduced impact logging, right? So the areas that are in the diagonal lines are their sustainable use areas, and then wilderness preserves, right, in these areas here. We did a broad scale comparison of large mammal occupancy in the sustainable use areas and then in the wilderness preserve, and then also sort of smaller scale or finer resolution scale assessment of the use of this network of logging roads within the sustainable use area to understand what is the impact of logging on large mammals. That project was shared with now Dr. Ariane Harris as part of her PhD dissertation. And we found largely that large mammals didn't really care about this logging operation, right? This particular operation closes roads and reduces access to hunters. So the main interruption is doing forestry surveys, identifying valuable trees, right? Having a skid road, a small skid road to access the tree, pulling the log out, and then closing the road back. And that manner of forestry has really reduced the impact, at least on these species. Ariane's other chapters looked at bats and birds, of which there was all sorts of things going on because they're more sensitive to changes in the environment. But as far as the large mammals go, we didn't see a whole lot going on. We also shared data with the FAO and Ministry of Public Works to support a road planning project. So there's one highway that goes from Georgetown on the coast, where Elian's from, to Lethem, which is on the border with Brazil. And most of that highway is unpaved, but it's in the process of being upgraded and paved. I don't know, they've been working on the 30-mile stretch for the last 3 or 4 years. So I don't know when it's going to be finished, but right, that's part of the process. So we leveraged camera trap data that we had to identify important road crossings and advise the Ministry of Public Works where underpasses and other roadkill mitigation structures might help modeling these 3 species, all of conservation interest, but they also have 3 different strategies for crossing roads, right? Giant anteaters are pausers or freezers, right? So when vehicles coming, they don't know what to do, so they just stand there, which is not a good strategy for crossing, especially with fast traffic. Jaguars are the in-between, and black curassows are the ones that see the car coming from far away, and then they're gone by the time you get there, right? And so we combine the data from these 3 species with 3 different strategies to identify these important, primarily bridges and creek crossings, identify places where putting those structures in would help reduce the impact of upgrading the road and increasing the speed and density of traffic over time, right? So sharing data, right, with the Protected Areas Commission on the hunting study, with IWCRAMA on the logging study, and with the Ministry and FAO on this study, helps you to broaden the impact of these sort of very grassroots small scale studies. But I feel over time also made us a useful partner for some folks that work on that level of conservation in Guyana, where as a graduate student, you think about, I want to make a positive impact as far as conservation goes, right? And so once you're a useful partner that's helped with various work, right, and you're working on these assessments of impact, environmental impact, you can start to scale your work up, right? And so this was a project that we worked on last year with the Field Museum of Natural History and a number of others, which was a rapid assessment and planning exercise for a brand new protected area in Guyana, which has been proposed but not quite yet gazetted. But as you can see, this is the Conacook Mountains protected area, which is a very large protected area by itself. And this new proposed protected area dwarfs the sort of largest existing preserve in Guyana. The data were presented earlier this year, and the protected area proposal is currently under consideration, but this has been work at the national level. We were also invited by the Wildlife Commission to do national wildlife management plans for 6 species of conservation interest, right? So we had a lot of data on tapirs already. We collected a little bit more, but we worked on tortoises, we worked on caimans, and had folks that grew up in a small village in Guyana's interior that sort of caught on to this project with their buddies. It was like, yeah, sure, I'll go to the bush and spend a few days and help set some cameras. all of a sudden now have a seat at the table in national meetings on planning projects at international conferences and other places, just through continuing to do this work, focusing on skills and building capacity, and being a present partner that's willing to collaborate. And so, as promised, back around to human jaguar conflict. And I've learned that part of this process in the long term is being patient, right? I wanted to do the human jaguar conflict project immediately when my dissertation was finished, or even before my dissertation was finished, but it wasn't until 2 years ago that we're actually able to start. That project is a whole presentation in and of itself, but it was really only when we had accumulated and had a number of other projects under our belts that both we were ready to undertake the new skills. So we had community mapping, we've had community workshops, we put GPS collars on free roaming cows, we had camera traps in high conflict areas, we did facilitation of livestock mitigation strategies, and Dr. Jessica Kaler, who's at UF, also helped with that process in places where we didn't have the capacity within the team, right? So bringing in other folks that can help has been big, and that project is currently ongoing. Serena K. Wall is another graduate student that I have here. She's working under this project umbrella as well, and that will continue to be ongoing, but was only really, our team was only ready to do it after we had the experience of working on a whole bunch of other projects. But I think we also were only able to secure the funding and get to have the opportunity to do this work after we had also proved ourselves on a number of occasions. And so the very last thing, right, I have been in presentations by faculty members where you wax poetic about things that graduate students should do, right? Looking back on the work that you've done over a certain period of time, here's the stuff that you should do. And I always thought that that was a little bit frustrating. Like, why didn't you do that when you had the chance? And I'm trying not to do that here because we're still working on these things very actively. But the most practical part that you may be sitting here thinking is, how do you pay for all that stuff, right? Conservation costs money. Conservation rarely, if ever, makes money. And so our experience has been to think outside of the box when it comes to funding sources. The partnership that I have with the Jacksonville Zoo that pays part of my salary, but also has an annual research budget attached to it, came from me driving back and forth to Gainesville about 50 times while I was a PhD student and presenting to admins and then to staff and then to volunteers and then to members and then to guests and to whoever else they wanted me to. So they gave me a little bit of money and then I kept bugging them. They gave me a little bit more money and a little bit more. And all of a sudden I was graduated and it was like, okay, what are we gonna do here? I gotta pay bills and get a job because my grad stipend is over. And then that was when things really started to get formalized. A number of the funding projects that we have had funded in Guyana have been as a result of the same sort of personal relationships and developing things over time. It's frustrating at first because just like any grant you would get, the funding never comes at the moment that you need it. It always comes 2 months after, or right, or you see the advertisement 2 months after it's too late, right? And the same thing happens. And so there's a lot of sort of starts and stops and hurry up and wait situations with this type of funding. But our experience has been that it also comes with flexibility of supporting our commitment to human capacity, right? So one of the challenges that I found, especially with grants, academic grants, others, is that there's an emphasis on there's lots of equipment grants, right? There's lots of travel grants, right? But then if you try to write into your equipment grant, I'm going to pay 50 people for 20 days. And they're like, no, we don't want to be paying people's salaries, right? We want to buy a bunch of camera traps. It's like, well, okay, but who's going to set them, right? And so pursuing flexible sources of funding allows you the freedom to invest in those things, which I believe brings along the conservation impact that you might want to achieve. There's the director of development, former director of development at Jacksonville Zoo, said something when I was a PhD student that really turned on the light bulb in my head, was that there's something like, I can't remember if he said 75 or 80%. 75 or 80% of all of the money that's available to support conservation comes in the form of private donations, right? And so I had this thought like, well, all of us are fighting over, you know, $5,000 field research grant from Cleveland Zoo, or right, whatever, these sort of smaller research grants. Maybe grants are great when you can get them, but there might be a whole other world out there of private funding that you can leverage to do the good work that you all want to do and that I continue to want to do. And while I still do actively apply for grants, I'm a professor at UF, so I'm required to do so, right? The majority of the funds that has supported all the work that I presented today has been either private funding or have come as a result of private donations to NGOs that then become sort of a project fund. There's a variety of ways that you can try to access those funds, but one of the best ways is just through direct communication, right? There have been times where I will meet people and I'll explain what I'm doing, and then nothing happens for months at a time, and then all of a sudden you get an email. Somebody, I remember the conversation we had about jaguars, and I want to support your work, right? If you are familiar with the large conservation NGOs in this country, they produce annual reports and they tell you who those people are, right? That provide them with those big money donations. And some of them are found like family foundations, some of them are just individuals. And so reaching out to those people directly and saying, this is my project idea. You might send 100 emails and not get anything, but you might get something, right? And those private funds very often don't require a grant report, don't even require a grant proposal. And so I say that not because I'm lazy, don't want to write a grant report, although I don't, right? But I say that because you only have a certain amount of time in the day, right? And if you could spend more of that time doing the work that you want to do, trying to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish and not writing reports, right, then the impact that you can make is even better. And so that has been our experience. I say all this and preface it with the fact that conservation, especially at the community level, right, it's hard to develop models that work everywhere. Okay, so maybe what we have been able to do, where we found successes and had failures, may work for us, but may not work for you. Your situation, your field site might be completely different. And so keep that in mind, but I wanted to share our experiences in case I said something that might be useful for you in your, I mean, I'm talking to Betty, Karen and Andy and John too, but mostly for you PhD students and master students that are working on projects. There might be something, a tidbit in here that I said today that was useful or interesting and might help you along the way. So hopefully there was something there, and I'm happy to, I have class at 1:55, so I have a hard out at 1:45, but I'm happy to answer questions between now and then that you might have.